The boy was born under a curse. From the moment he drew his first breath, the gods whispered his name Hercules, though men would later call him Hercules. His father was Zeus, king of the gods, his mother, a mortal queen. And Hera, the betrayed wife of Zeus, watched with venom in her heart. She struck when he was still in his cradle. To serpents, their scales glistening with poison, slithered into his bed, but the infant did not scream. His tiny hands seized the creatures, their bones crunching between his fingers, their blood smearing across his skin like a dark omen. He grew too fast, too strong. His tutors feared him. Playmates broke beneath his grip. By 12, he killed his first man, a boy who dared steal his lyre. The blow was accidental, but the skull had shattered like clay. Then came the madness. Hera's curse slithered into his mind, twisting his thoughts, until he saw only enemies. In a red haze, he turned on his own family. His wife's screams were cut short. His children's blood painted the walls. When the fog lifted, he stood knee-deep in their corpses, his hands trembling, his soul in ruins. Exile was his punishment. The oracle spoke, 12 labors, or death. And so the demi-god knelt before his cousin, King Eurystheus, a weakling who trembled at the sight of him. The first labor was given, the Nemean lion awaited, and Hercules walked toward his fate, his hands still stained, his heart already damned.
Hercules and the Nemean lion.
The beast's roar shook the earth. Hercules stood at the mouth of the cave, his muscles coiled, his breath steady. The stench of rotting flesh rolled out in waves, half-eaten corpses of warriors who had come before him, their bones cracked open for marrow, their armor crushed like tin. The Nemean lion was no ordinary predator. Its golden hide was impervious to blade or arrow, its claws sharper than any sword. It emerged from the shadows, eyes burning like molten gold. Saliva dripped from its fangs, still glistening with the blood of its last meal. No words were spoken, no challenge issued. The lion lunged. Hercules barely dodged, feeling the wind of its massive paw as it tore through the air where his head had been. He swung his club a single, crushing blow to the beast's skull. The wood splintered on impact. The lion barely flinched. It struck again, claws raking across Hercules' chest. Blood welled in thick ribbons, soaking his tunic. Pain flared, but he grinned through gritted teeth. This was no hunt. This was war. He lunged forward, wrapping his arms around the lion's throat in a crushing grip. The beast thrashed, its claws tearing into his back, shredding flesh. Hot blood spilled down his sides, pooling at his feet. The creature's roars turned to choke snarls as Hercules squeezed, his muscles trembling with divine fury. Bones creaked. The lion's struggles weakened. With a final, wrenching twist, Hercules snapped its neck. Silence. Then, with the beast's own claws, he peeled back its golden hide, the sound of tearing flesh wet and heavy. When he emerged from the cave, draped in the lion's pelt, the villagers fell to their knees. Not in reverence, in terror, for they had not sent a man to kill a monster. They had unleashed something worse.
The Hydra's blood.
The swamp breathed poison. Thick, green mist coiled over black water, bubbling where the Hydra's venom had seeped into the earth. Bones littered the shore, skulls cracked open, rib cages splintered from within, the air reeked of bile and rotting meat. Hercules waded in, the muck sucking at his legs like greedy hands. Then, the water trembled. 9 serpentine heads erupted from the depths, jaws unhinging, fangs dripping venom that hissed where it struck the surface. The Hydra's eyes burned with ancient malice. It did not roar. It laughed a sound like drowning men choking on their own blood. The first strike came fast. A head snapped forward, fangs sinking into Hercules' shoulder. He roared, not in pain, but in fury, and brought his sword down in a cleaving arc. The head tumbled, black blood spurting, but from the stump, two more writhed into existence, screaming. The Hydra was growing. Steel was useless. Fire was the answer. His nephew Iolaus stood at the shore, torch in hand. No words passed between them, only understanding. Hercules seized one thrashing neck, muscles straining as he wrenched it down into the mud. The Hydra's other head struck like vipers, fangs tearing into his arms, his chest. Blood sheeted down his body, mingling with the swamp's filth. He did not let go. Iolaus lunged, pressing the torch to the bleeding stump. Flesh sizzled, the Hydra shrieked, a sound that split the sky. One by one, Hercules butchered the heads, and one by one, Iolaus burned the wounds shut. The stench of seared meat filled the air. The last head immortal, unkillable, thrashed wildly, its golden eyes wide with rage. Hercules grabbed it by the throat, dragged it from the water, and buried it beneath a boulder, its muffled screams echoing even as the earth swallowed it whole. But the battle was not over. The Hydra's blood was a living curse. It soaked into Hercules' skin, burning, festering. He would carry this pain forever. And deep beneath the swamp, something in the darkness stirred, waiting, hungry, alive.
The golden hind's agony.
The forest was too quiet. No birds sang. No wind stirred the leaves. Only the ghostly shimmer of the Ceryneian hind's golden antlers flickered between the trees, a fleeting mirage, a taunt. For a year, Hercules had pursued it, his muscles carved hollow by exhaustion, his sandals worn to shreds. Artemis' sated beast could not be harmed, but it could suffer. He found it at dawn. Drinking from a moonlit pool, the arrow took it in the hind leg. A clean shot, a brutal mercy. The hind's scream was not animal, but human, a sound of betrayal, of divine violation. It stumbled, its golden hooves slipping in the mud as its leg bent at a sickening angle. Hercules was upon it before it could flee, his hands closing around its throat, not to kill, to dominate. The beast fought like something cursed. Its antlers gouged his ribs, its thrashing hooves cracked against his skull. Blood sheeted down his face, hot and metallic, but his grip only tightened. He could feel its pulse hammering against his fingers, the frantic rhythm of a creature that had never known fear until now. With a final, wrenching twist, he bound its legs with cords of sinew, its breath coming in ragged, panicked bursts. Its golden eyes rolled white with terror as he hauled it onto his shoulders, its weight bowing his spine. Blood from its wounded leg painted his chest in glistening streaks. Artemis would forgive the sin, but the hind would remember. And as Hercules carried his bleeding prize through the gates of Mycenae, the gods watched in silence. The hunter had become the hunted, and the forest would never be silent again.
The boar of Erymanthus. Snow fell in crimson-stained clumps. Hercules climbed the frozen slopes of Mount Erymanthus, his breath curling in the thin air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Below him, villages lay in ruins, huts crushed beneath monstrous tracks, the earth churned to mud with blood and terror. The Erymanthian boar was no mere beast. It was a force of slaughter, its tusks curved like executioners' blades, its hide matted with the frozen gore of its victims.
He found it in a glacial pass, its massive bulk steaming in the cold. It charged without warning. The impact sent Hercules skidding through the snow, his ribs screaming as the beast's tusks grazed his side. Hot blood splashed across the white ground. The boar wheeled, its hooves cracking ice, its breath a stench of rotting meat and iron. It struck again, lower this time, a brutal upward thrust meant to gut him. Hercules twisted, but not fast enough. A tusk ripped through his thigh, painting the snow black. Pain was nothing, blood was fuel. He lunged, his hands closing around the boar's throat. It thrashed, its tusks flinging droplets of his own blood back into his eyes. The world blurred red. His muscles burned, his wounds wept, but his grip was iron. Snow melted beneath them, they writhed, man and monster, locked in a death struggle that shook the mountain. Then a shift in balance, a mistake. The boar stumbled, its hooves slipping on its own blood. Hercules roared and drove it down, his knee crushing its ribs with a sound like snapping timber. The beast screamed, a sound so human it froze the air. One final twist, one brutal wrench, and it lay panting, broken, its flanks heaving like a bellows. He did not kill it. That would have been mercy. Instead, he bound its legs with chains, the metal biting deep into its flesh as it whimpered. Blood dripped from its snout, from its wounds, from the gashes it had torn in him. A trail of scarlet followed them down the mountain, a path of suffering carved into the snow. When Eurystheus saw the beast alive, bleeding, screaming, he hid in his bronze jar like a coward. But Hercules stood tall, his body a tapestry of pain, his soul darker still, 4 labors down, the worst yet to come.
The Augean Stables.
The stench hit him first, a wall of rot, so thick it made his eyes water. 30 years of filth. Mountains of dung steaming under the sun, crawling with maggots, buzzing with flies drunk on decay. The bones of dead horses jutted from the muck like broken teeth. King Augeas had promised him gold to cleanse this nightmare. But Hercules wasn't here for coin. He was here to drown a kingdom in its own filth. The river Alpheus roared at his back, its waters churning with impatient fury. With a crack of his shoulders, Hercules drove his club into the stable's foundation, stone split. Wood screamed, again, again, until the walls groaned and collapsed inward, revealing a seething, squirming mass of corruption. Then he turned to the rivers. Muscles straining, veins bulging like ropes beneath his skin, he tore through the earth itself. Dirt sprayed as his fingers clawed trenches, redirecting the twin currents toward the stables. The waters hit like a flood from Hades, a tidal wave of liquid filth exploded through the ruins. Flies drowned in midair, maggots boiled to the surface in writhing white masses. The sludge surged, carrying with it the bloated corpses of animals, their burst bellies releasing gases that popped like gunshots. Augeas' men gagged, their eyes rolling back as the stench punched through them. One collapsed, vomiting bile, as the black tide swallowed his legs. Hercules stood in the deluge, letting the foul water scour the blood from his wounds, the sweat from his brow. The people screamed, clutching their bellies as plague winds carried the stink for miles. Cattle dropped dead in the fields, birds fell from the sky. When it was done, the stables were clean, but the land was poisoned. Augeas, pale and trembling, refused payment. Hercules said nothing. He simply turned away, leaving the king to choke on the reek of his own arrogance. One labor finished, 1,000 new curses born.
The Stymphalian Plague.
The marsh exhaled death. Hercules stood at the edge of the black waters, his nostrils filled with the stench of rotting fish and spoiled meat. The lake was still too still. No frogs croaked, no insects hummed. Only the occasional glint of bronze among the reeds betrayed the horror lurking beneath the surface. The Stymphalian birds were no ordinary creatures. Their feathers were daggers, their beaks could pierce armor, and their dung festered with a poison that melted flesh from bone. The villagers had shown him the victims' men whose faces had liquefied like wax, their eye sockets pooling with yellow pus. A sound broke the silence. A single, metallic click, then the marsh erupted. Hundreds of winged terrors burst from the water, their bronze feathers slicing the air with a sound like drawn swords. Hercules barely had time to raise his lion-skin cloak before the first volley struck. Razor-tipped feathers embedded themselves in the pelt, some punching through to draw blood from his arms. One grazed his cheek, opening a thin red line that dripped onto his lips. The taste of copper fueled his rage. Athena's gift lay heavy in his hand, a pair of bronze crotala, thunderous clappers meant for war. He smashed them together. The sound cracked across the marsh like divine thunder. Birds shrieked, their flight patterns scattering in chaos now, while they were disoriented. His arrows fanned their marks with wet thuds. One bird exploded in midair, its corrosive blood raining down to sizzle against his skin. Another took a shaft through its gullet, its death scream cut short as it spiraled into the marsh. The water hissed where their acidic blood touched it, sending up tendrils of poisonous steam. Hercules fought like a man possessed. Arrow after arrow flew, each finding a feathered heart. The sky darkened with falling bodies, the marsh water turning frothy pink with their blood. A stray feather sliced through his tunic, opening a gash across his ribs. He barely felt it. When the last bird fell, silence returned to the marsh. But it was a different silence, now thick with the smell of blood and burned flesh. Hercules stood knee-deep in the fouled water, his body crisscrossed with cuts, his arrows spent. The villagers would return to find their marsh cleansed. Yet as he waded to shore, something nagged at him. The water's edge still bubbled faintly. Deep below, something stirred. The eggs would hatch. The plague would return. But that was a problem for another hero.
The Cretan bull's fury.
The earth trembled beneath its hooves. Hercules stood alone on the black sand beach of Crete, salt wind whipping his blood-caked hair. Before him, Poseidon's cursed bull pawed the ground, its nostrils flaring plumes of steam, its hide glistening with sweat and old blood. This was no mere beast, it was a force of nature. Its muscles coiled like storm clouds, its horns curved like scimitars. The villages it had razed lay smouldering in the distance, the streets paved with the bones of those who had tried to stop it. The charge came without warning. Dust and sand exploded as the bull surged forward, its horns aimed at Hercules' gut. A fraction slower, and they would have spilled his entrails across the shore. Instead, he twisted, feeling the wind of its passage, catching the stench of its matted fur blood and brine and madness. His hands shot out, grasping one horn, his boots digging trenches in the sand as the beast's momentum nearly tore his arms from their sockets. The bull screamed, a sound that shook the cliff sand reared, its hooves slashing the air. One caught Hercules' shoulder, sending white-hot pain down his spine. Blood sprayed, painting the sand in crimson arcs. He tasted iron, felt his knees buckle, but his grip held. Muscles straining, veins bulging like ship's ropes, he wrenched the bull's head sideways. Bone creaked, the beast staggered, its hooves slipping in its own blood. For a heartbeat, it faltered. That was all Hercules needed. With a roar that rivaled the bull's, he surged forward, driving his forehead into its skull. The impact cracked like thunder. The bull swayed, its eyes rolling back, legs buckling. Before it could recover, Hercules was on its back, his thighs locked around its heaving ribs, one arm hooked around its throat in a chokehold that would have felled a titan. The bull bucked, twisted, threw itself against the cliffs, each impact rattling Hercules' bones, each jolt reopening his wounds. Blood sheeted down his arms, poured in the sand beneath them. Still, he squeezed. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, with a shuddering groan, the bull collapsed, its massive body quivering, its breath reduced to wet, ragged gasps. Hercules didn't release his grip until its heartbeat slowed to a weak flutter beneath his knees. When he rose, the sea itself seemed to recoil. He bound the beast's legs with chains that groaned under its weight, then dragged it to the shore, its hooves carving furrows in the sand. The waves turned pink where they lapped at its wounds. As the ship bearing them both pulled away from Crete, Hercules watched the island shrink on the horizon. The bull's labored breath warmed his back. 7 labors done, the worst yet to come.
The mares of Diomedes.
The wind carried screams across the Thracian plains, not the cries of men, but of horses and natural, guttural sounds that twisted the air into something foul. Hercules crested the blood-soaked hill and saw them, 4 beasts of nightmare, their coats slick with gore, their teeth bared like wolves. These were no ordinary steeds. King Diomedes had fed them on human flesh, and now their eyes burned with a hunger no hay could satisfy. The ground trembled as they charged. Hercules barely had time to brace before the first mare was upon him, her yellow teeth snapping an inch from his throat. He twisted away, but not fast enough. Her incisors raked his shoulder, tearing meat from bone, blood sprayed hot across his chest. The second mare struck from behind, her hooves cracking against his spine, sending him sprawling into the mud, churned with the remains of Diomedes' victims. Rib bones jutted from the earth like broken fingers. He rolled just as iron-shod hooves stomped down where his skull had been. The stench of their breath-rotting meat and bile filled his nostrils as they circled him, their flanks heaving, their muzzles dripping saliva tinged pink. They were not merely animals, they were butchers. And Hercules would treat them as such. With a roar, he lunged for the lead mare, his hands closing around her throat. She screamed, a sound to human, and thrashed, her hooves battering his ribs. Something cracked inside him, he ignored it. His grip tightened until veins bulged in her neck, until her tongue lolled purple from her jaws. Only when her body went slack did he release her, turning just in time to see the remaining three prepare to charge. Then inspiration struck. He seized the corpse by its mane and hurled it at the others. The mares hesitated, nostrils flaring at the scent of their fallen sister. That moment of hesitation was all Hercules needed. His club swung in a brutal arc. A skull shattered like ripe fruit, brains painting the grass. A second mare reared only to meet his fist driving upward, crushing her jaw into her skull. The final beast turned to flee, but Hercules was upon her, riding her down like the damned, his hands twisting her neck until vertebrae popped like wet twigs. Silence fell over the plains. Hercules stood panting amidst the carnage, his body a tapestry of blood, some his, most not. In the distance, Diomedes' warriors finally emerged, their swords drawn, their faces pale. They would learn the same lesson as their king. Man or beast, all fell before the son of Zeus, 8 labors done. The stables of Olympus would feast well tonight. The girdle of Hippolyta. The Amazonian shore smelled of salt and iron. Hercules stood at the prow of his ship, watching the crimson-stained waves lap against the hull. The water here was never clean. Warrior women trained in these shallows, their blades turning the tide pink with their own blood. Today, it would run redder still. Hippolyta's girdle glinted in the sunlight, a belt of gold and leather said to be forged by Ares himself. Eurystheus wanted it for his daughter. Hercules wanted only to take it. The Amazon queen met him on the black sand beach, her bare torso crisscrossed with scars, her eyes dark with the promise of violence. She did not speak, neither did he. Words were for men who needed them. The first arrow came from the trees. It buried itself in Hercules' thigh before he could react. He snapped the shaft without flinching, his gaze never leaving Hippolyta's. She smiled, teeth like bone needles, and raised her axe. The beach erupted into chaos. Amazon warriors surged from the tree line, their war cries splitting the air. Hercules' companions fell first, one man's skull crushed beneath a spiked club, another's belly opened by a curved blade. Blood misted the air, painting the sand in wet, crimson arcs. Hercules moved like a storm, his club swung in wide, murderous sweeps, shattering limbs, crushing ribs, sending bodies flying into the surf. Bones cracked, flesh tore. The Amazons did not fear death, they welcomed it, throwing themselves at him with frenzied abandon. A spear grazed his ribs, a dagger bit into his shoulder. He barely noticed. Hippolyta struck like a viper. Her axe bit deep into his side, carving a furrow through muscle. Hercules roared, backhanding her with enough force to send her sprawling. She rolled to her feet, blood dripping from her split lip, her grin wider now. They clashed again, steel on flesh, flesh on steel. Her axe whirled, his club countered. The sand beneath them turned to mud with their mingled blood. Then betrayal. One of his men, cowardly and desperate, drove a spear through Hippolyta's back. The point erupted from her stomach in a burst of gore. Her eyes widened, not with pain, but fury. Hercules caught her as she fell, her blood hot against his chest. With her last breath, she spat in his face, then her fingers loosened around the girdle. He took it without ceremony. The Amazons wailed as their queen died, their attacks growing frenzied, reckless. Hercules cut through them like wheat, his path back to the ship paved with corpses. As the sails filled with wind, the shore receded, the waters darkening with the dead. 9 labors done. The girdle weighed heavy in his hands, it always would.
The cattle of Geryon.
The ocean burned crimson at sunset as Hercules stepped onto the cursed island of Erythea. The air reeked of salt and slaughter, the sand stained black from centuries of spilled blood. Beyond the cliffs, the monstrous cattle of Geryon lowed in their pens, herds of beasts with hides like polished bronze and eyes that glowed like embers. Their guardian, the 2-headed hound Orpheus, lay eviscerated at Hercules' feet, its twin muzzles still snarling in death, its entrails steaming in the evening chill. But the true horror awaited. Geryon emerged from the shadows of his fortress, a colossus of flesh, 3 torsos fused at the waist, 6 arms gripping weapons still dripping from his last massacre. His skin was the color of a drowned corpse, his 3 faces twisted into identical sneers. He did not speak, he did not need to. The pile of skulls surrounding his stronghold told his story well enough. The first arrow took Geryon in the leftmost throat. The giant barely flinched as black blood bubbled from the wound. His 6 hands tightened around axes, swords, a spear barbed with human teeth. Then he charged. The ground shook, 300 pounds of muscle and hatred barreled forward. Hercules barely dodged the first swing, a massive axe that split the earth where he'd stood. The counterblow from a spiked mace grazed his ribs, sending him skidding through the sand, his own blood mixing with the filth underfoot. He fought like a man possessed. His club shattered one of Geryon's wrists, bones jutting through blue-tinged flesh. A sword meant for his gut instead buried itself in his thigh as he twisted away. Pain was meaningless now. Blood loss was a distant concern. There was only the dance of death, the symphony of steel meeting flesh, the wet crunch of cartilage giving way. Geryon's middle head vomited a torrent of black bile when Hercules' blade found its eye. The rightmost body collapsed when he severed its spine, the legs still twitching as the torso slid into the surf. But the left fought on, howling through a mouthful of broken teeth, until Hercules drove his sword up through its jaw and into its brain. The giant toppled like a felled oak, his remaining faces frozen in shock. The cattle lowed as Hercules herded them toward his ship, their hoofs trampling Geryon's corpse into the sand. 10 labors done, the sea turned red behind him. Some stains never washed out.
The apples of Hesperides.
The desert wind howled through the bones of dead men as Hercules climbed the mountain, where Atlas groaned beneath the weight of the heavens. The Titan's muscles trembled like earthquake fissures, his breath coming in labored gusts that reeked of sweat and ancient stone. Blood dripped from where the celestial sphere had worn his shoulders to raw meat. Hercules needed no introduction. The stench of his previous labors clung to him, Geryon's black blood still crusted under his nails, the Hydra's poison still burning in his veins. Atlas' laughter shook pebbles loose from the cliffs. "Let me fetch them for you," the Titan rumbled, his voice like grinding continents. Hercules knew the trick, knew the moment he took the sky's weight, Atlas would leave him there to rot. He took it anyway. The moment Atlas shrugged off the heavens, the cosmos crashed onto Hercules' shoulders. Stars burned through his lion pelt, searing flesh. Galaxies coiled around his spine, compressing vertebrae until they creaked. Blood vessels burst in his eyes, painting his vision red. Atlas returned with 3 golden apples, clutched in his fist, their perfume so sweet, it made rotting corpses seem fresh. "Keep them," the Titan grinned. Hercules' tendons screamed as he adjusted the sky's weight. "Hold this," he gasped, "while I pad my cloak." The moment Atlas took back the burden, Hercules snatched the apples and ran. leaving the Titan's roars of betrayal to shake the pillars of the earth. 11 labors done, the sky still dripped celestial blood where he'd held it.
Cerberus Maw.
The cave exhaled death. Hercules descended into the underworld, the stench of rotting souls clinging to his skin like oil. Charon's boat had left black ichor on his hands, where he'd strangled the ferryman for passage. The river Styx whispered with the voices of the damned, their pale fingers breaking the surface like reeds, grasping at his ankles as he waded through their misery. Hades' palace loomed a jagged moor of black marble, its pillars carved from the petrified screams of titans. The god of the dead awaited on his throne of bones, his flesh the color of a week-old corpse, his eyes burning with funeral pyre light. "You want my hound?" Hades rasped, the words slithering from his throat like serpents. Hercules said nothing. His club, still wet with Charon's blood, spoke for him. The gates of Tartarus shrieked open. Cerberus emerged in a wave of breath and rattling chains. 3 heads, one snarling, one howling, one laughing, all dripping saliva that burned holes in the stone. The beast's hackles were impaled spears, its flanks stitched with the scars of countless battles. It pounced before Hercules could breathe. The first head clamped onto his shoulder, fangs punching through muscle. The second tore into his thigh, ripping free a chunk of flesh. The third laughed as Hercules' blood splattered its tongue. He roared, driving his fist into the laughing mouth, shattering teeth. Cerberus yelled, the sound echoing through the underworld like damned souls screaming. They rolled through the ashen plains, a tangle of muscle and fury, churning up bones older than Olympus. Hercules straddled the beast, his hands closing around her throats. The third head thrashed, its jaw snapping inches from his face. He squeezed until vertebrae popped, until the howling head went limp. The snarling one followed. Only the laughing head remained, its tongue lolling as Hercules pressed his forehead against its muzzle. "Enough," Hades hissed. The chains materialized from shadows, wrapping around Cerberus' neck. Hercules stood, his body a tapestry of blood and saliva burns, his breath coming in ragged gasps. 12 labors done, the surface world had never seemed so bright or so hollow. As he climbed toward the living, the underworld's whispers followed. "You belong here now."
The death of a demi-god.
The labors were done, the monsters slain, yet the gods were not finished with him. Hercules walked the earth like a ghost, his body a map of scars, his hands forever stained. The Hydra's poison still festered in his veins, a slow burn that no healer could cure. The Nemean lion's pelt, once golden, had darkened with years of blood and grime, the fur matted into stiff, blackened clumps. He took a wife again, Deianira, thinking perhaps mortality could cleanse him, but the fates laughed at such hopes. When the centaur Nessus tried to steal her, Hercules put an arrow through his throat. The beast died grinning, his blood foaming with venom. A gift, he croaked to Deianira as he expired, pressing a vial of his poisoned blood into her hands. For when his love grows cold, years passed. The rot in Hercules' bones spread. His strength became a curse uncontrolled, violent. One night, returning home stinking of wine and other women, Deianira offered him a robe soaked in what she believed was a love potion. The moment the fabric touched his skin, the Hydra's venom awoke, flesh sizzled, muscle peeled from bone. Hercules screamed, not in pain, but in rage that after everything, it would end like this. Not by monster or god, but by the hand of the one person he dared to love. He tore the robe away, taking chunks of his own skin with it. His blood hit the floorboards, hissing like acid. Mad with agony, he uprooted an olive tree and built his own funeral pyre atop Mount Ota. As the flames licked his flesh, the heavens split. Zeus' thunder rolled, Hera's laughter echoed. And in that final, searing moment Hercules understood, the labors had never been his punishment. They had been his purpose. The fire burned away the man, leaving only the legend. And on Olympus, where the gods feasted eternally, a new chair scraped against the marble floor, a place for the monster they had made, a throne for the hero they had broken. At last, home,